So my name's Kat. I'm with Cadence Distribution. We're hosting a series of presentations to kind of give you guys an educational experience, inspire you about hi-fi audio design, and now we're actually going to switch it up and talk about recording and the art of recording and why some records sound the way they do, how we capture them, and what styling techniques we use to capture that sound and how we mix it and all the good jazz. And so with me is Tony Faulkner. He's one of the best recording engineers out there today. He's most famous for recording in halls and capturing a lot of orchestrated pieces. So, Tony, welcome.
Hello. I'm not selling anything, so don't worry about it. I'm going to sit down as well.
Yeah, I'll sit down too. It's been a long day.
So the reason I'm here is because I'm a friend of AJ Shirker of Cadence and SME and Garrard and Spendor and Siltec and whatever. And AJ wants to make some recordings to work best on his equipment of his favorite music, which is Indian music. And most Indian music is not recorded in a way that's terribly compatible with being audiophile. It would be recorded dry with lots of compression, lots of EQ, lots of mucking about with the sound. So AJ came up with this idea that he would fly over, I think it was 12 musicians from Mumbai and New Delhi, and we would stick them in an acoustic environment like they were doing a concert, tell them they couldn't have headphones and clicks and fold back, and make them play with each other. And not only did we do it straight to stereo without mixing or post-production or anything, we would go straight to analog tape, and we would tell them there could be no editing. So most of the pieces were 5 or 6 minutes long, so we were in with a chance. But if they screwed anything up, they had to do it all again with the old-fashioned way, which, as far as I'm concerned, is much more exciting than listening to stuff that's been created in a workstation, which all ends up a bit generic, a bit like having tomato ketchup with everything. It has its place, but you don't want it on everything. The other reason I'm here is if you people have very kindly paid my mortgage off by buying recordings that people like me have made. I'm sure you must have some questions you've always wanted to ask of the people who got it wrong long before it reached your equipment. The gentleman from Nagra was talking about one of the philosophies of Nagra is that they want to minimize the amount of damage that their equipment does to the music. Well, believe me, a lot of damage happens long before it gets anywhere near a piece of Nagra equipment. I try to minimize it, but the sort of music I do is, if I'm doing the New World Symphony with the London Symphony Orchestra live in the Barbican, I can't do a lot of damage unless I try very hard. So I'm stuck with the live sound as put together by a bunch of very competent musicians with a fine conductor in the front. So they've done most of the work for me. The only thing I'm confronting is that I'm putting a ship into a bottle, and it's never going to be quite the same as sitting in a good seat in a concert hall. But that's not always convenient, and in the case of Sir Colin Davis, it's no longer available because he died a couple of years ago. And if you wanted to enjoy Tippett, Roseleg, for example, which is a rare piece of music that Sir Colin did with the LSO, the only way anybody's ever going to hear it will be off a CD or off vinyl or on the radio. So I think we serve a purpose as recording engineers, even if we do really screw it up.
You definitely serve a purpose. I actually want to just comment really quick before we get into the whole flow of the story about you making the joke about paying the mortgage. I think it's super important that both of these worlds are meeting, recording and hi-fi, because they neither of them would exist without one another. And someone who is a musician and a recording engineer too, I can appreciate people investing very much in the playback and wanting that type of sound and just buying music. Because I feel, of course, once digital became very popular, a lot of that fell off. And so, I just want to thank the hi-fi community for keeping that cadence up, no pun intended, and also then also learning about how the music is recorded and appreciating that. So yeah, I think it's important that both of these worlds are meeting and that we keep talking to each other about it and that we understand where one another is coming from, because both technologies are very important.
But they're very different worlds.
Yes.
I remember going round to see a friend of mine who was a trombonist in the London Symphony Orchestra, and his hi-fi system was one speaker on top of a wardrobe and the other speaker on the floor behind the settee. And they were left, right, reversed, because when you play the trombone in the orchestra, the violins are on the right from where you're sitting. And conversely, most audiophiles that I know don't go to concerts very much and have a fairly limited catalogue of music that they listen to, and they're not necessarily very keen on exploring anything as supposedly highbrow as Tippett Roseleg, where if they heard it, they might actually be blindsided that it's really rather good and rather interesting. Years ago, I made a recording of Renaissance polyphony from the 11th century, which sounds an immediate bore. I can hear people snoring already. This was for Hyperion, Feather on the Breath of God. And it hardly sold any copies at all until it was played on Radio 2 by the Northern Irish lady, I can't remember her name. And they had 16,000 telephone calls saying, what the hell was that? And it sold hundreds of thousands once people weren't scared of it. The problem with classical music is most people are scared of it, and they think that you've got to have a glass of sherry before you have your lobster thermidor for dinner. And classical music's not like that at all. And if you meet classical musicians, most of them aren't like that at all either.
Yeah. I'm a classical musician, and I played morphine earlier today, so, there's a contrast
you took what?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Okay, so let's just roll it back really quick and talk a little bit about how you got into recording and when you first, what got you into recording?
Well, my dad got a tape recorder when I was 8, and I played with it all the time. Unfortunately, I didn't break it. I did break the carriage clock they had in the lounge because I wanted to take it to pieces, and I couldn't put it back together again, but every 15 minutes I went and moved the hands. But I did get caught. When I was at school, I did music, and I was very keen on playing the recorder. I was one of those awful, pretentious kids who used to get asked to go and do noise flood and all that sort of thing. And when I got to school, I was told that I should play the flute because they needed a second flute in the school orchestra. So I did that, and I didn't really warm to playing the flute very much. And I didn't want to do it for a living anyway. So this is the closest I get to doing that for a living. And the other advantage is that I get to do a whole realm of different kinds of music. If I just played the flute in the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and I was second flute, the range of repertoire I would get to play would be fairly limited, where in my work it's fantastic. 1 week I'm doing Indian jazz for AJ. The next I'm doing the Royal Air Force Central Band, and the week after that I'm doing the Royal Ballet Symphonia. It's a huge range of repertoire, and I enjoy it. And really my favourite is probably Josquin des Prés, but I don't get much opportunity to record that.
Okay, so there are a bunch of different style of recordings. You can be in a studio, you can be live, halls. How did you pick your spot in recording? How did you?
In terms of technique, 2 areas. One's doing Renaissance polyphony, which again sounds terribly posh. It's just church music from 1600, something like that, or a bit earlier, a bit later. You can't possibly record that by giving everybody a microphone, otherwise it just sounds ridiculous. It sounds like the Swingles on a bad day. And I did a lot of work with a group called Pro Cantieni Antiqua, doing bird masses, tallis, Portuguese polyphony, Magalhães, and people like that. So I just did it with 2 mics, or in the earliest days we were doing surround, believe it or not. Surround's not a new thing. We were doing surround in 1972, and I was doing it at university in 1969. There's nothing new. If you think Atmos is new, we were doing with height in 1969. I wasn't in short trousers, but I was still young.
Yeah.
The other thing is that my background originally, in terms of making any kind of money out of it, was recording concerts for people and giving them cassettes for them to use for promoting themselves. And that I was very lucky in that, because when I was at university at Guildford, there was a Tonmeister course which I didn't go on because they thought I was unsuited. The students there wouldn't record visiting recitals because they got other things to do, and I had a Revox and 2 Calrec mics.
Nice.
So I recorded all sorts of song recitals and string quartets, but there was never any editing. This was a concert, and you press the record button at the beginning and you press the stop button at the end. And that's my idea of how to record. I think you should be eavesdropping on a performance. And obviously, if it's going to be a commercial release, nobody wants to listen to cock-ups or people coughing all the way through. So you have to do a few dirty tricks, but my philosophy is still based on eavesdropping on a live concert or something a bit like a live concert.
Okay, you've got a specific sound. I mean, how would you define your sound on? Okay, you've got a specific sound. I mean, how would you define your sound on records? Like, I mean, is there something that inspired you to capture
the room?
Yeah.
And the space.
Yeah.
One analogy I think of is if you were going to take a picture of a boat, you couldn't avoid having the sea and the sky in it. It's not just about the boat. And when you record an orchestra by giving everybody a microphone and sitting there like a DJ, you're creating something other than what a live orchestra sounds like. It can be plausible, it can be enjoyable, but that's not my trade, my style.
Was there someone that inspired you, like, to capture that type of style and, like, get you in that mindset?
Several. Chris Parker at EMI, Bob Gooch at EMI, Ken Wilkinson had a very straightforward approach to symphony orchestra, a main pickup, maybe a couple of woodwind mics if they were set back in a live hall. Bob Auger, Lewis Layton from RCA.
Yeah, because a lot of people do follow your miking techniques. I mean, when I was studying at university, a lot of my professors actually studied Tony's miking techniques and followed that. So it is a very specific sound that he's capturing. So actually, let's talk about the mics a little bit. You have a pretty eclectic mic collection.
Yeah, I've got some of the original mics that RCA used in their living presence. And they're pretty wonderful. And I was lucky to buy them for next to nothing when they closed the studios, because RCA Studios was sold to Internal Revenue to become a storage area in New York for all their files. And they closed the studio and they had a big auction, which wasn't terribly well publicized. I found out about it. And at that time, I just inherited Reader's Digest work, which had always been done by Decca. And suddenly Decca had been taken over by Polygram, and Polygram said, you can't do any work for outside companies anymore. Can you recommend anybody? And very kindly, David Frost recommended me. But the condition was that I must always use M50s as main microphones. And I used to scrounge them off EMI for 100 quid each a day. And then in the end, I thought, I've just got to get some.
Yeah.
And they turned up in this auction. And I bought them for bugger all, really, because valve microphones are a pain in the neck to maintain. It's a bit like having an old Bentley or something like that, or buying a Spitfire. The maintenance is pretty serious and you can't get the parts. I was really lucky with these mics, and they paid for themselves very quickly because I paid bugger all for them. I'm thinking about selling them now because I don't have a pension fund, being a freelance guy, and that would be a very good pension fund.
Oh. The pension fund of microphones. So every hall sounds different. I'm assuming you're not walking through just clapping around and...
No, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you've got some minions that do that.
No.
No? You don't? Okay. So how do you know what mic techniques you're going to be using and maybe what microphones that you want to use to capture whichever ensemble?
It really depends how live the space is, particularly without an audience in it. Some of the concert halls are pretty wet. But with an audience, it changes quite dramatically. The main thing is trying to capture some deep bass weight. I don't mean thumpity thump from a one double bass plucking. The sound of an orchestra needs weight, and that's happening below 20 hertz.
Yeah.
And a lot of microphones don't do much down there, particularly modern mics. They're phantom powered. So there's a low pass filter a high-pass filter built in, whether you like it or not. So the old mics are really good at that. And for example, when I'm recording in a place like, say, the Royal Festival Hall, if I look at the meters on the individual microphones, the only ones that have got any of the rumble of the hall are valve mics.
Awesome.
Because all the modern mics have very tidily got rid of it.
I feel like that's what actually started that whole mindset of like, the tubes having that warmer, bloomier sound in a sense, because they are having that lower bottom end.
Yeah, and the designers worried about it at the time. I did a lot of work with Tim DeParavicini, which some of you may have heard of Tim.
EAR 834p, anyone? Okay.
Well, for years I've used, I'm not going to tell the story I said it yesterday because we're on video. But I still use Tim's mic preamps. But there again, their telephone numbers, they're only sold in auction because EA or Yoshino don't have any circuit diagrams or any parts. And Tim used to wind his own transformers. So the gear weighs a ton. I mean, seriously. He made a mixer for me, which was 46 kilos. 4 of us to carry. That was out of its suitcase, out of its flight case. But that's where you get bottom end. If you've got really good transformers.
A tube mixer?
Yeah.
Nice.
He did an 8-to-2 valve mixer for me.
Awesome. I don't know.
But I did have to retire it last year because I couldn't get it pat tested. It wasn't safe enough. Although I never electrocuted anybody. There was a risk I might. The preamps are easy, and they do sound fabulous. And we use them on AJ's recording of Indian music, and you can hear it just in the weight and the presence of the sound.
Okay, so you do a lot of remote recording too. I mean, people hire you for specific projects. What mixer do you bring with you while you're doing that? What gear are you on the road with?
Well, if it's digital, it's going to be a mixer that's in the laptop. If it's analog, or in Henry Wood Hall, where I can use AJ's mixer, we use an Audient solid-state desk, because the valve mixers are a bit of a liability and extremely heavy. And I'm very happy with the Audient. I must say it was designed by a friend of mine and built by a company I know. Very high quality, not exactly cheap. I think 16,000 quid for a 16-to-2. But lovely sound, plenty of headroom, plenty of bottom end. And the interesting thing is, since I've had access to AJ's mixer, I can do an analog mix and a digital mix at the same time, even for a digital end product. And the one off the analog mixer does sound better to my ears. Not hugely, and I don't feel embarrassed to use the digital mixer because, that's the world I live in. Mm-hmm. I can't say I'm not going to use anything to do with digital because I won't get any work. That doesn't make me a prostitute, it makes me a realist.
After each session, you're committing to the mix, right? You're printing the 2-channel and then it's off to whichever medium.
Well, it depends what
label.
editing's involved. Sadly, doing live recordings, people expect more editing now, and that was a real shame. When we were working with LSO Live early on, which is 1998 to 2000, there was really very little editing. Just if there was a perfect performance of Mahler 6, except there's a horn split at one particular moment, then you would edit around that, because if you hear that horn split every time you listen to the recording, it's habit forming and it's not right.
Right.
But now, the last LSO recording I did in the live series was 2003, and we did Sibelius 6, a rerun of the one I'd done with the LSO for RCA. The RCA one, I think, had a total of 15 edits, including gaps between movements.
Yeah.
And the one I did for LSO Live had 140 edits in it, between rehearsals, 2 performances, and the dreaded patching session, which musicians hate, which is when they have to come back after doing a concert, when they're tired and sweaty and want to go home, and somebody makes them record bar 136 to bar 142 because there was a squeak. And they're not interested in that.
Yeah. That is what I love about the analog world, is this whole like theme of commitment, because as a younger recording engineer, I'm always mixing and recording digitally, and I find that I don't have to commit to as much, and I can fix things in the mix, so to speak. And
Well, I think it's very similar to the film business, that people say how much better they look when they're shot to film. Part of that is because they have to commit.
Yeah.
They're not going to spend 3 weeks doing grading and mucking about and doing everything in green screen, because green screen with film stock is going to be a serious pain in the bum.
And that's like the true art too. I mean, I have like 40,000 plugins, and I just keep scrolling through them, and ultimately I end up only using like 6 of them on every record I do. So it's like, why would I give myself all these options when I really just
I think it's good to commit. The artists have to, and we found with AJ's project that they actually quite enjoyed working together and hearing each other and blending and doing dynamics. I mean, when you're doing a live orchestra with a conductor, the conductor's doing a lot of work, so the brass don't overpower the strings at the wrong moment, all that sort of thing. People go to a lot of trouble to get the dynamics right live. Why would they want it to be mucked about with afterwards?
Right. It's just like keeping the human aspect of it alive. And
the other funny thing with dynamics is that if you think of a trombone, if you ask it to play FFF, the maximum growl they can get out of it, and then you make them play PPP, it's not just 26 dB quieter, it's a completely different sound. And I think you need to preserve dynamics to try and make it sound like a concert. And it depends if you want it to sound like a concert or not.
Yeah.
A lot of albums aren't made to sound like a concert. They're a separate construct.
And like speaking on dynamics, because my first thing that comes to mind is compression. And I know probably a lot of you guys are aware that a lot of things are way more compressed these days. It's a lot louder. There's a lot less separation in between musicians. And so you hardly use any compression?
I don't, only if I'm desperate. The only time you might be desperate is if you're doing, I remember we did Damnation of Faust live with the LSO and Sir Colin Davis. And in the second half, Faust goes off to hell with a big bang. And the big bang is 16 dB louder than anything else in the piece. So I really ought to do, I mean, the concert hall, that's very dramatic and very exciting and wonderful. But on a CD in your kitchen, it's a pain in the neck, because you bring up the volume for the quiet stuff and you think, what the hell's going on here? And then he goes off to hell and blows your amplifier up and your speakers. So I have to do a few things to accommodate dynamics, but I try to keep it to a minimum, and I certainly don't just press a button that says compress.
The hit it button?
Well, plenty of other people do that already for you.
I know.
If you listen to classic FM, that is very compression friendly, because most of the people who are listening have got it on a bedside radio or in the car.
Yeah.
And they can't possibly cope with the dynamics of a full symphony orchestra.
It's like I could put like a Tony Faulkner preset on one of my like digital compressors, and it would be hardly any ratio, but it'll be there. And I can just have old Tony Faulkner mix.
Well, there is some compression, whether you like it or not, just from the air and from what microphones don't quite do that you would like them to do.
Yeah.
But I think as long as you have respect for dynamics, that's a pretty good start.
Of course.
And if you're a performer, one of the most difficult things to do is to play quietly. Playing loud's easy, that's just like shouting. Playing quietly is quite hard, and singing quietly is quite hard.
So, okay, speaking on, again, dynamics, noise floor, vinyl today, like how do you feel about the noise floor of vinyl and how things are so much louder, and the techniques of...
I think you shouldn't overreact. I think the dynamics are important. And if you listen to good recordings from the past, they're perfectly good and they're perfectly dynamic. If somebody's fiddled with it, that's been their choice. Dynamic range with digits is obviously different, because the noise floor is very much lower. But the problem is the background in digits isn't just noise. It tends to be, if you're going to be scientific about it, it's an error signal rather than noise. And if it's an error signal, it's not a terribly musical one, or one that you can forget about, because it's either intermod between the sampling rate and the music that's playing, or else it's some weird alias. And neither of those is musical.
Yeah.
Where with analog, it's mainly low order harmonics, which just make it sound a bit richer and more puddingy.
Are you usually collaborating with a an engineer or someone that you
I've done so little
confide in?
vinyl. I haven't done vinyl really since 1980 or 81. And I used to go and attend, I would go to Pi Studios in Great Cumberland Place. And there were two cutting engineers I worked with, Mike and with Malcolm Davies, who was on the Beatles team. And they did hardly anything. They would just make sure that they would listen through the whole side and work out how loud they can get on there.
Right.
If they've got to equalize the bass.
Yeah.
Because with LPs, the amount of playing time you get depends on how much you allow below 50 hertz.
Right.
So they would make a calculated guess. And if overall we thought, oh God, that sounds a bit boomy, they might put an equalizer in. But nothing really, none of this all the way through, just a bit.
That's the DJ.
Yes.
That's the DJ move.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So like a lot of people these days are still trying to fit, 26, 25, 27 minutes on one side of a record. And you really just can't do that. So you cut off a lot of the lower harmonics, the subsonics to help.
And you could sometimes have to mess with the width, the stereo width.
Yeah.
Because stereo LPs you can't cut too much width. Otherwise you start losing land on the.
Are you cutting the upper frequencies too? Like above like 20K and 15?
Well, there's not usually, to be honest, there's not a lot going on up there with vinyl. The only issue with vinyl is that the frequency response of a vinyl LP varies between the beginning and the end. And at the beginning, you've got too much treble, and it's about right in the middle. And by the time you got to the end, you're probably 4 or 5 down at 10K, which is significant.
And it's also interesting calibrating a cartridge and tuning an analog system from the outer to the inner groove as well, because there are different alignments that you can do that will get you that better distortion value, either from start or to the end or throughout the whole record. So
and there's another fundamental problem in that any record player that I know has an arm that goes like that, but when they cut the disc, it's cut like that.
Linear.
So you have to work out where you're going to, how you're going to set how it fits in the groove, because it's always, apart from the very middle, it's going to be a bit out at both ends. But that's just a given. You're stuck with it. That's
according to tape. How often are you doing that now?
I got rid of my A80s 5 years ago because I hadn't used them for 10 years. And that's not because I don't like them or don't want to use them, but I hadn't got any clients who were remotely interested in it.
Because
it's
expensive,
sad,
or is it because,
well, the market had shifted to CDs and then it shifted to downloads. And it's a specific market now for LP. If you're a major artist, you might well do an LP release because it's nice to wave in front of people at a chat show. But the marketplace isn't huge. I think probably still now most LPs are sold secondhand because you can get such a deal from your local Help the Ages shop, buying them for a couple of quid a time. And they've got a fair here, I think, selling off LPs. They're expensive to make. And I suppose at the audiophile end you can justify it because you can charge a premium price and there's enough in it that it's worth doing. But for most, if I'm doing 2 Beethoven sonatas with a pianist, how many would we sell on vinyl through normal channels? And the answer is very few.
Do you have a favorite hall that you record in?
St. Petersburg, but I'm not allowed there anymore. It's a fabulous hall. And the orchestras, there's 2 orchestras I work with there, we used to work with, and they're so used to the hall, and the conductors are so used to the hall, and it's a beautiful, big, round sound. And you don't have to use a lot of mics. And I've done some big projects in there. We did a new soundtrack to the Alexander Nevsky movie.
Oh, nice.
That was with chorus and soloists and a massive orchestra, about 90-piece orchestra.
Wow.
But I did that with main pair in the middle, 2 outriggers and 2 woodwind mics, a bit. That was it. Even the soloist came in on the main mics.
For a 90 piece.
Yeah. And it sounded, I must say, it did sound pretty good. And it got a Grammy, so can't be too bad.
There you go. And then just like a specific project that you're like particularly proud of, or it just kind of all came together and you were like, hell yeah, that's it. You know, like, was there something that...
I don't know, it's a bit like asking a chef the favourite meal he's ever made. I've got some soft spots for certain recordings, mainly associated with the artists, because if they know how much to interfere with me and for me to interfere with them, and what sort of things we can work on as a team, when that happens, it's magic. It's lovely working with people who want to work with you. And one of the greatest compliments I had was after Sir Colin Davis died, one of his best friends said to me, do you know which was his favourite recording that he'd done? And I said, no. And he said, oh, it was Sibelius 6. But he would never listen to it on his hi-fi. He listened to it in the kitchen, and he listened to it in his, on the bedroom radio, because he just felt it was natural and represented what he wanted to do with Sibelius 6.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was rather nice.
So, okay, let's actually talk about that for a little bit. Hi-fi and the playback. Do you have a hi-fi system that you do listen to, either your recordings or other music that you might be listening to at the time
Not
in your
really.
home? Or okay.
No, because I listen to music for 9 hours a day sometimes, and my idea of fun is not sitting home listening to more stuff.
What is your reference system, though?
At home, it would be quad electrostatics, the old 63s, and Tim de Paravicini's 50 watt aside stereo pre-power combined. I'm very happy with that.
Tube?
Brilliant. And for a CD player, I've got can't remember, it's an American freestanding drive that I bought from thing upstairs from Ricardo. And for a DAC, I use a DCS Bartok.
Oh, nice.
So that would be my system if I bothered to set it up. But most of the time, the speakers are in the garage. And if I want to do critical listening, I go into Henry Wood Hall, where we've got a control room, and I've got the big quads there and some New Vista power amps from Musical Fidelity before they discontinued them. And I'm very happy with the sound in there, because it's a difficult room. It's a bit boomy and it's got a barrel ceiling, but the quads work in there.
You've got some microphones for us today,
Yeah,
and I kind of want you to touch upon those a little bit because they're cool as hell.
Yeah, well, what should we start with?
Yeah,
Ribbon. I love ribbon
let's do ribbon.
microphones. They have many advantages, like ribbon tweeters have, in that they have a very flat mid-range, very low distortion. You can even shout into them and they don't distort. These are modern ones based on the 1933, I think it is, patent from RCA. Only they have much more high frequency extension and better damp bass. And also these are active electronically, so you don't have to spend 5,000 quid on a mic pre to get enough signal out of them. These are made in Australia by a company called Rode, who also made the microphones for this video on both of them and the radio mics.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, I'm on their development team, which I really enjoy. These are lovely mics.
Yeah.
This is a valve. You could use it as a vocalist mic, which is probably most used for, but it works very well on stringed instruments. Very sweet sound. You can change the polar diagram from omni to figure of 8 to cardioid, whatever. And the other one,
He's talking about the polar pattern of the microphone, how it's going to capture.
this is just everybody in any studio will have a collection of half-inch diaphragm cardioid microphones. It's standard. The famous one would be a KM84.
That's what I thought it was yesterday.
Yeah, this is the Rode latest version, which I contributed to the design of, and this uses a lot more power than the KM84 was allowed to make in 1967 or whenever it was it came out. This is Class A.
That's a Neumann microphone
Yeah.
that we're referencing.
This is a very useful spot microphone if you need spot microphones.
Okay, but you modified that one. You've got...
Well, no, I worked on the team when they were developing for production.
Yeah.
And they've sold quite a few of them. I don't know.
So, I mean, I just want to emphasize that we're all tweak heads, you know, when we're swapping cables, we're swapping cartridges, like that's real, you know, all of that.
Yeah, we don't tweak cables too much because I'm working in a domain where we're balanced. Everything is on XLR3s or whatever extra you need for powering valves. And we're running long cable runs. I would rarely run less than 30 meters of cable run. And that's an issue because that can be 13 nanofarads to be a techie for a moment.
Yeah.
And that's not very kind to a modern transistor mic. And it's okay with a valve mic because they're transformer coupled and they don't mind looking at 30 meters of star quad. So I'm not tweaky about cables. I'm in the control room. I've got nice speaker cables.
No, but you're tweaky about other things.
Oh, I'm very tweaky about all sorts of things.
So I'm just saying it takes one tweak to know another tweak.
Yeah, they're just different tweaks.
Okay, cool. So we'll just tweak out then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate your time. Is there any other advice that you want to lend to people, or maybe?
No, I'd like some questions.
Let's open it up for questions.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to have listened to the Feather on Breath that got only last week.
Oh, yeah.
I must have dozens of recordings you've made, so I've made my little contribution to your pension.
Thank you very much.
But two questions. The serious one is you've made a number of references to recording in the Barbican, which has a reputation of being a difficult acoustic and quite hard to make a successful recording.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that? The second one's just my curiosity. I have a sneaking feeling you might have done some reviews for Hi-Fi News sort of 30, 40 years ago. Is that?
It could be. My first job, my first proper job was working for Angus Mackenzie, who was a reviewer.
Yeah.
And I ghost wrote a couple of reviews for him.
Okay. All right. Anyway, the serious questions about Barbican.
The Barbican, the first answer seems like a silly answer to a valid question. One is to get a good conductor. If you've got a bad conductor who doesn't do any work on accommodating the Barbican being dry as mutton, then you're dead to begin with. Whatever you do with microphones, you're stuck with the fact that it's rubbish. But Colin Davis, I did a lot with Colin Davis, Arvid Janssens, Maris Janssens, Rostropovich, trying to remember the other conductors, Andre Previn. They find it a challenge to work in there, and they would make it a lot easier for me. It's only really a problem once you get anything bigger than a Mozart piano concerto, because it's too easy for the brass to overwhelm. And if you've got great players like the late Maurice Murphy, you can't expect him to tone his sound down because that's the sound he makes and it's exciting. So there are moments where the conductor just has to make the judgment for you. There are some cheats I did in the Barbican. They wanted me to add a lot of extra reverb, which I never did. I always added a bit sometimes, but only to save my life. One thing you can do, if you use microphones like these, because they're figure of 8 and they don't pick up vertically, if you use them that way and point those towards the brass, they don't pick up the brass. And that helps. Otherwise, you really just have to lie back and enjoy it. And some reviews were terrible, and some responses from people who bought them and didn't like what they got it when, what it sounded like when they got it. And in the end, I had enough of it. I did 5 years of it, nearly full time. And it was starting to get niggly that there were individual players in the orchestra, it's a self-governing orchestra. There were individual players who were becoming obsessive about thinking it should sound as though we were recording in the Musikverein or in the Kingsway Hall, and we weren't. But the real answer to your question is to get a good conductor. And fortunately, the LSO has access and uses good conductors, and they did most of the work for me. String sound's the real problem, trying to make it sound sweet, because it's dead at high frequencies in there. But we managed.
Yeah, I mean, good musicians make good sounds too, so, you know.
Well, I think part of it's a management issue. You let people do the work for you if you're a good manager, and you oversee it and you're part of it. But you can't micromanage. In the end, you have to go with working with the best people, and then you get good results. and you hope you got away with it. These days they put a lot more reverb on, and I'm not so keen on that. I find it all sounds a bit generic.
Nice. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
Well,
on that
not
one.
everybody likes their steak rare. I like my steak rare, and there'll be other people who want to cover it in ketchup.
When recording on location, what is your preference for monitoring, on headphones or on speakers?
If I'm in a place I know, like Henry Wood, I use my quads. If I'm going somewhere where there's a chance of using the smaller quads, the 63s, I'll bring them along. But there's quite a few rooms you can't. There's a band I record in the West Country, and they put me in the ladies' toilet for a control room. Well, there's no point in taking quads in there. I've got some two-ways, active two-ways made in Australia by a subsidiary of Rode called Event Opals. And they are very, very credible, good, two-way, simple. And they're not silly money. I think they're about 1,200 quid each, including built-in power amps. And they're very presentable. Otherwise, I've got headphones I've known to love, HD 650
Nice.
Sennheisers.
Classic.
I'm not so keen on the 800s. They're a bit more hi-fi, but I find the middle of the orchestra for me is important. The violas and trombones when they're not playing fortissimo. That tends to get lost in a lot of headphones because all of them end up with some kind of suck out in the middle to find bass and to find a bit of brilliance on the top. And the shape of that dip is an issue for me. And if I have hi-fi headphones, I'm going to come home with it sounding pretty weird on speakers, and that's not much good.
Do you record digitally? Is it PCM or DSD?
PCM. I did do a lot of DSD. The main problem with it is post-production. Just a simple thing like bringing the level up 2 dB. It's a 1-bit system. How do you dither a 1-bit system? And the way everybody's gone in recent times is to convert the DSD to PCM, muck about with it, and then convert it back to DSD again. Well, for me, I'm not happy with that. If I'm going to be a purist, which I can afford to be, and I can say no. I can edit DSD, but I don't really want to. Anyway, high-speed PCM.
Yeah.
Either 192 or 96, depending on the client.
You talked about old mics and bass. Are these kind of mics that you're working on now, are you rectifying the situation?
Well, these do go way down to the nothings,
Yeah.
and my old M50s do. The other mics don't. And I could try tipping it up, but equalizing tends to have its own sound as well and make it sound a bit compressed. And in a way, I just sort of lump it, put up with it. And if you're doing well, quite a lot of the work I do is videoed at the same time. And if it's going out as a video medium, it's unlikely that people will have a system that does much below 20 hertz anyway.
Should we play some tape?
Yeah, can we play some tape, AJ?
Let's jam
Please.
out.
It's very unusual to have everybody in the same room playing together, because these days the vocal would have been put on later.
Yep.
You'd probably do the rhythm first, and then the flute would only have been available on the Thursday afternoon, and the guitars would only have been available on the Friday morning, and it would all be pasted together in a workstation. And this is organic, which I really rather like. It's not as precise as if we'd done it to click, but who wants to play to click? It's horrible.
Oh, it's horrible. Keeping you in the grid the whole time.
Yeah, it's inhuman.
Yeah. So I was just saying that vocal was recorded with the AEA 440 mic. That's the one that's behind me. It's a lovely microphone.
Yep, no EQ.
No EQ. I mean, kind of in a way, it's like how I'm picking cartridges on turntables to then complement a speaker. It's reproducing that sound, and that's what you get. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, dude.
Thank you.